2006, I just finished high school. I went to Peru for 4.5 months to look for some rare and little-known bird species, like the enigmatic long-whiskered owlet, a bird described as recently as 1976, where researchers accidentally caught one in a mist net. But since then, nobody ever saw it again. I've always been fascinated by birds for as long as I can remember. When I was a little kid, I called my black and white stuffed toy Pika Pika, which I later found out was the Latin name for magpie. Whenever I had the chance, I asked my mom, who's here in the audience, to take me to the island of Texel or to the swamps of the Oostvaardersplassen to watch birds. Of course, this meant that I was a bit of a loner during high school, because I would spend all my spare time counting migratory birds on windswept dunes or on the pier of Scheveningen. Well, back to Peru. So after a long day of hitchhiking and sitting on overcrowded buses, I arrive in a tiny village along a dusty mountain road in a remote northeastern corner of Peru. Here I plan to become the first person ever to observe the long-whiskered owlet in the wild. I have no clue what it sounds like. Nothing is known about its ecology. I just know roughly at what altitude I should focus my search. Of course, I did not find the owl on that trip. But what I did find was a beautiful, pristine patch of cloud forest in the mountains high above the village. And here I found some other amazing little-known species, like this beautiful Lulu stoddy tyrant, or this amazing royal sun angel, both birds that are only found in Peru. But when I returned to this site, 5 weeks later with 2 friends, all was gone. All that remained was a smoldering clearing, and we could see how the last 1,000-year-old trees were being hauled onto logging trucks and transported to the lowlands. We just stood there feeling powerless and sick to our stomach. Okay, something else. Is there anyone here who knows this little frog? Anyone? No one? Okay, that's no surprise, because this little frog doesn't have a name yet. It was only recently discovered on one isolated ridge in northern Ecuador. Okay, and this bird. Anyone? Anyone? Not even my dad here in the audience? Well, this bird is the Araripe mannequin, a critically endangered bird only found in a remote part of northern Brazil. And how about this fearsome-looking cat? Anyone? Come on, guys. A jaguar, of course. We all know the jaguar. It is the largest carnivore in the Neotropics, and it is the icon of the Amazon rainforest. Why is that? Why do we all know the jaguar and none of us the other amazing animals I just showed you? Well, for the last couple of decades, the eyes of the world were focused on the Amazon, and for good reasons. It is the largest and most biodiverse tropical rainforest on our planet, and sadly, it is rapidly disappearing because of us. And if this immense ecosystem were to collapse, global weather patterns would change and climate change would accelerate. But maybe, to a lesser extent, this is also true for all the other amazing ecosystems around the world that we mutilate on a daily basis. All these ecosystems are home to unique animals, which all play a vital role in keeping the ecological balance in the world. But with each new generation, our accepted thresholds for environmental conditions are lowered. Each new generation unknowingly accepts the new situation in which they were being raised as normal. This is called the shifting baseline syndrome. I can best explain you this by telling you the story of Easter Island. This island in the South Pacific was once covered by a lush palm forest, which was home to dozens of endemic bird species. But when the Polynesians arrived around 1200 AD, they started to fell the forest to make way for pastures. And the rats that traveled with them on their boats started to eat the palm seeds and the eggs of the endemic bird species. So what followed was an ecological disaster of unprecedented proportions. And now we all know Easter Island for its beautiful windswept coast, its rolling grasslands, and those bizarre statues behind me, which are actually grim reminders to the ecological disaster that once took place here. And this phenomenon, the shifting baseline syndrome, also happens much closer to home. Remember when I told you that as a little kid I would spend all my spare time counting migratory birds on the pier of Scheveningen? This is how that looked. Well, I can also remember vividly that when I rode my bike into the dunes near my house, I would hear the familiar purring sound of the European Turtledov. And now that sound is long gone from the dunes. And in fact, this bird is barely clinging on in the Netherlands. And the same is true for our national bird, the black-tailed godwit. When I was a little kid, I would see them everywhere. But over the course of the last 3 decades, its population has more than halved. And it is all through our industrialized farming. And this is especially worrying if you consider that 90% of the European black-tailed godwit's population breeds right here in the Netherlands. Sadly, this is the new reality for the next generation of young bird watchers. If we continue down this path, all these wonderful ecosystems around the world will become our children's and grandchildren's Easter Islands. But I wouldn't stand on this stage if I only had a depressing story to tell you. No, this is TEDx, and I'm here to tell all of you a story of hope. What if I would tell you that all those amazing animals I showed you earlier are actually still there? And that populations of some of them have been stabilized or are actually increasing? Well, it is true. And it is because of land acquisition. So, what is land acquisition? It means that we empower local communities and local NGOs to buy and lease the land on which endangered ecosystems and animals are found. We help them to build corridors, to reconnect remaining forest patches. And we boost populations of endangered animal species through innovative conservation methods. Ultimately, this will benefit nature, but also people. Because these people will be able to make an income through sustainable ecotourism or conservation. And this means that they will no longer need to cut down trees or kill and trade in endangered animals. Fortunately, a growing number of large nature organizations have made land acquisition a top priority. Like the IUCN-NL Land Acquisition Fund, who is already doing this for over 20 years now. And in doing so, they have saved dozens of endemic and critically endangered bird species from the brink of extinction. In Bolivia, for instance, they helped a local NGO, Armonia, to buy the land and create the Barba Azul Nature Reserves, which protects one of the last remaining strongholds of this beautiful bird, the blue-throated macaw. By working with local cattle farmers instead of against them, they managed to stabilize the population. And a couple of months ago, I received news that they had a record count in the reserve of 228 individuals. It's actually less than half. Well, it's optimistic, but it's less than half of all the people here in the audience. But it is good news because the population is increasing. And a fun fact is that our zoo, Artis, has designed the nest boxes which these parrots now use for nesting. Even more inspiring. In the Kurdistan region of northern Iraq, they helped this young woman, Hana Raza, in a war-ridden, man-dominated part of the world to buy land and create a peace park. And this peace park protects one of the last homes of the Persian leopard. And you must understand that in 10 years of doing research, she actually never saw this leopard in the wild. She only knows this animal from camera trap footage. Now that is dedication, if you ask me. So in 2016, 10 years after my previous visit, I returned to Peru. Again, I aim to see the long-whiskered owlet. That tiny mountain village along that dusty road is now a buzzing town, along a busy tarmac road. And as these roads function as tentacles of the major cities, I expect the forest to be largely gone by now. But to my amazement, most of the forest is still there. And that horrifying, smoldering clearing of 10 years ago has actually been overgrown by secondary forest. Along the road, I see a sign that says Abra, Patricia Nature Reserve. And I learn that the land along the road was bought 10 years ago by a local Peruvian NGO called ECOAN. And that the Dutch organization, the IUCN-NL Land Acquisition Fund, helped to co-fund the buy. So that night, I stay in an eco-lodge, which is owned by that same Peruvian NGO and is run by the local community. I eat at a local restaurant, which is owned and run by the local community. And that night, I venture into the forest again, armed with just a flashlight and a tape recorder. But this time, I'm not alone. I'm with a local boy from the village who was trained by that same Peruvian NGO as a guide, which means that he can now make a living, he and his family can actually make a living through sustainable ecotourism. And that night, in a pitch-black forest, armed with just a flashlight, I stare into the bizarre orange eyes of the long-whiskered owlet, which is staring back at me from a thick, moss-covered branch. And to me, this little owl, the blue-throated macaw, the Araripe mannequin, and even that little frog are living proof that we can save our planet's biodiversity through land acquisition. Thank you very much.